Sonali.
Benson sir, am I audible?
No, could you speak a little loudly, please?
Hello ma'am, am I audible now?
Yes.
Okay. Um, a very good evening to everyone who's tuned in with us today. I, Shreya Yadav, welcome you all to this webinar on the topic RTI, a tool for democracy. This webinar is organized by Public Concern for Governance Trust, PCGT, in association with Children's Welfare Center, Law College, Malad. Amongst us, we have today trustees and staff of PCGT, faculty and management of CWC Law College, and over 300 students tuned in with us on Zoom as well as on our Facebook platform. Public Concern for Governance Trust was founded by the late Mr. B.G. Deshmukh, former Cabinet Secretary to the Government of India, Mr. Julio Ribeiro, former Commissioner of Police, Mumbai, and Director General of Police Punjab, and Dr. R.K. Anand, pediatrician and former Director of Jaslok Hospital. The mission of PCGT is to strive for good governance in the city of Mumbai. Public Concern for Governance Trust has initiated the Youth for Governance program to sensitize youth on issues of governance and to develop leadership skills, especially in public activities. It provides a platform for the youth to collectively question, discuss, and initiate action on related issues. Youth for Governance program aims at changing the students' perspective towards ethical conduct in whatever profession these students finally opt for, be it in the government or the private sector. YFG has various programs like the RTI program, PCGT dialogues, and Good Governance campaign that mobilize youth and promote awareness regarding issues of governance and other issues prevailing in the society like sexual harassment, eve teasing, and emerging social concerns of the contemporary world. Youth for Governance program helps to build the students' perspective towards becoming a responsible citizen. Established in the year 2010, Children's Welfare Center Law College, located on Marway Road, Malad West, strives to produce competent law professionals year after year. The college is affiliated to the University of Mumbai and enjoys recognition by the Bar Council of India and the Government of Maharashtra. Law graduates of CWC Law College have excelled as advocates, lawyers, activists, and other law practitioners. I would now like to invite Mr. Sachin Gamble, Principal in charge of CWC Law College, to share his thoughts with us.
Thanks, ma'am. Good evening to all,
Good evening.
respected dignitaries, Sumit sir, Ribeiro sir, teacher, and my dear students. On behalf of Children Welfare Center Law College, I welcome you all on this webinar, namely Right to Information, a tool for democracy. Dear students, freedom of speech and expression is always protected by rule of law. According to our law of the land, freedom of speech expressly mentioned under Article 19, Clause 1, Subclause A. In addition to this, right to information is one of the dimensions of the said right. To give effect to the said provision, our Parliament has enacted the legislation, namely Right to Information Act. The sole object of the said legislation is transparency and accountability in the public administration. To enlighten us on this topic, we have Honorable Sumit Mullik sir, Chief Information Commissioner, Government of Maharashtra. I am grateful to sir in his busy schedule. He accept our invitation. So I appeal to the committee. We proceed with the further schedule. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for your encouraging words. Mr. Julio Ribeiro graduated in Commerce and Law from Mumbai University. He joined the Indian Police Service in 1953 and rose to be the Commissioner of Police Mumbai. Later, Sir served in quick succession as Director General, Central Reserve Police Force, Director General of Police Gujarat, Special Secretary to the Government of India's Home Ministry, Director General of Police Punjab, and finally, Advisor to the Governor of Punjab. Besides other awards, Sir is the recipient of Padma Bhushan in 1987. Post-retirement, he was appointed as the ambassador to Romania, where he served for 4 years from 1989 to 1993. The then Prime Minister, Shri Atal Bihari Vajpayee, had asked Sir to be the governor of Jammu and Kashmir, but Sir declined because of his involvement in social work in his native city of Mumbai. He heads the Mohalla Ekta Committee, which seeks to bring about communal harmony between the diverse communities in the city of Mumbai. May I now request Mr. Ribeiro to address our audience.
Good evening,
Good evening, sir.
Good evening.
young
Good evening,
people,
sir.
in particular, who are going to listen to Mr. Sumit Malik, the former Chief Secretary of Maharashtra and now the Chief Information Commissioner. The PCGT has always been interested in this, in the incumbent of this position, because we are so concerned with what the Information Commissioner's office is doing to help people to become more knowledgeable, to have a better quality of life, to know about what is what and what their rights are. So you will hear all that from Mr. Malik. I have heard him many times. In fact, he used to be, when in his junior career, when he was a junior officer, he used to be the protocol chief of Maharashtra. And whenever I was invited for the consulate parties in Mumbai, I used to hear him. And I was always very impressed that he came totally prepared, which was unlike any other protocol officer I had known. And he knew all about the country, whose toast he was going to raise, because he represented the government at such functions. And normally these parties used to be on the national day of that particular country. And I know Sumit Malik used to come prepared not only with the history and politics of that country, but also its economy and cultural factors, that, and every possible knowledge about that country he would first read up and then come well prepared, which I was always very impressed about. So I'm very eager to hear him. You have not come here to hear me, you have come to hear him. So I will only say that I welcome him, and I welcome all the young people who are present here who want to know more about the Right to Information Act. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much, Ribeiro, sir. The Right to Information Act 2005 is regarded as a very citizen-friendly act. The basic object of the Right to Information Act is to empower the citizens, promote transparency and accountability in the working of the government, contain corruption, and act as a tool for democracy. Mr. Sumit Malik, our speaker for today, entered the Indian Administrative Service in the year 1982. His first posting was that of an assistant collector in Nagpur. He went on to become the additional collector, urban land sealing in Mumbai, before being deputed to the Sangli collector's post. He has also served as the Chief Executive Officer of the Maharashtra Industrial Development Corporation and was later appointed as the Secretary to the Maharashtra Governor in the year 2003. Mr. Malik has handled various portfolios, including Departments of School Education, Social Justice and Special Assistance, Excise, and the General Administration in the Maharashtra government. Sir has served as the state's Chief Protocol Officer, Additional Chief Secretary, and further went on to become the Chief Secretary of Maharashtra in the year 2017. Sir has also authored 4 books. Mr. Malik currently serves as the Maharashtra State Chief Information Commissioner. We're glad to have you, sir. Before we begin, there's just 2 instructions for all our participants. I request you all to please keep your cameras on and your mics on mute, and you can send in your questions for our speaker in the chat box. Thank you. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Shreya. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. So today the topic of the webinar is Right to Information, a tool for democracy. It is truly a tool for democracy, an essential tool for democracy, because democracy requires, one of the essential features of democracy is that it should have an informed citizenry, an informed public. That is what makes a democracy genuine, makes it real, makes it vibrant. Because you have to remember, across the world, most countries claim to be democratic, but many of them are not actually democratic, only in name. It is therefore essential that the public has to be informed about all the issues and up to date about all the issues for democracy to succeed. And to be informed, of course, logically, you need information. You need access to information. Now, democracy, it operates through elections. So we have elections every 5 years for the parliament and for the assembly, for which I hope you people vote if you reach the voting age. And then you have elections, local elections for the municipalities. In the rural areas, you have elections for the Zilla Parishad, the Panchayat Samitis, the Gram Panchayats. And then you have other elections also. You'll be having elections for your housing societies. And probably in your colleges, you'll be having elections for your unions. So there's a lot of elections going on. There's a lot of democracy going on. In fact, that's one of the criticisms about democracy, because we always seem to be in a election mode. And people say that we never really get down to work, and we're all the time bothered about the next election. But democracy doesn't just mean voting in an informed way during elections. What you do between the elections, what you do for those 5 years, from one election to another election. You just can't sit idle and pretend everything is all right. Democracy requires you to be vigilant. So apart from being a representative democracy, it is also essential that you become a participative democracy, and you have to participate in the decision-making processes of those representatives who you have elected to power, and you have to now hold to account. Democracy as we know it now probably originated in the Greek city-states around about the 6th century BC. There in the Greek peninsula, the Peloponnese, along the Aegean Sea, you probably had about 1,000 of these city-states. Well-known ones are Athens, Sparta, Corinth, Syracuse, Thebes, Rhodes. There are a lot of them. And they were all democratic. They had all the forms of democracy, everything that we associate democracy, they used to have all of that. And democracy is something that encourages free thinking, radical thinking, criticism, and there's an outpouring of new ideas, outpouring of philosophy, outpouring of art, outpouring of science. That is one of the features of democracy. It results in all these things. And you had great people associated with the Greek civilization of that time, people like Socrates, Aristotle, Plato. Socrates was one of the greatest of the classical Greeks. And he was very democratic in the sense that he always went in for critical reasoning, a dialectical approach to question answer, to seek the truth, and constant criticism. And probably was a bit advanced for that time, because he ironically became a victim of democracy. And the people voted that he was corrupting the youth with all his radical ideas. So they voted that he should be executed. So he had to drink hemlock, and he was forced to commit suicide. In modern times, the right to freedom of information was recognized by law as long back as 250 years ago in Sweden. In Sweden, they came out with a law, the Freedom of the Press Law, which gave statutory right to the right to freedom. And more recently, there was another milestone in 1966, when we had the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. I'll repeat that, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, and Article 19, just like Article 19 of our Constitution, they also had Article 19 of the Covenant, which said, and I'll quote, "Everyone has the right to freedom of opinion and expression, And the right includes freedom to hold opinions without interference, to seek, receive, and impart information on ideas regardless of frontiers. So this basically means that there should be absolutely no bar to seeking information, receiving information, imparting information, absolutely no bar. There should be no frontiers to it. So this was a very sweeping legislation which pushed forward the concept of the right to information. Consequently, in 2018, because of these international enactments, I only mentioned a couple of them, but there are a number of others as well. So by 2018, there were 123 countries. That means the majority of countries in the world. There are roughly about 204 countries or 205 countries. Some countries are still not recognized, but they consider themselves to be countries. But the majority of them have a right to information law. So this is a family of nations, which are obviously all democracies of various flavors, of various types. And it's only in democracies where the government guarantees a right to information. Dictatorships, monarchies, theocracies, they don't do that. So the right to information has been gaining increasing recognition in various other human rights treaties, because information is now regarded to be a human right. It is a right. Without information, all other human rights, they fall by the wayside and becomes meaningless. I'll develop on that a little later. And it is also regarded to be not only a tool for democracy, but as a tool against corruption. And there was a United Nations Convention Against Corruption of 2003, where the right to information was highlighted. This is fairly obvious. I mean, corruption operates in secrecy. Corruption it operates in the darkness. So the moment you have information flowing, then corruption becomes minimal. In India, unfortunately, we had a paradigm of the Official Secrets Act of 1889, which is the exact opposite of the Right to Information Act. So the paradigm of the government during the British period and even after independence was secrecy. The government claims secrecy as a matter of right, and that is a very paternalistic, feudalistic attitude that the citizens don't have any right. They will not be able to use the information which the government has. So the Right to Information Act in 2005, it finally buried the Official Secrets Act. The Right to Information Act, it's a very thin piece of legislation, but it's a very powerful legislation. It is specifically said in one of the sections that it overrides the Official Secrets Act, and it also overrides every other act and every other law in the land if it is in conflict with that act or the law. It's extremely powerful. And it also debars any courts from interfering in the process of the right to information as given in the various sections of the Act. Courts, however, they take up various cases which have various decisions which have been passed by the information commissioners in writ. So the court has writ jurisdiction. So they use the writ jurisdiction in order to overturn some of the decisions of the information commissioners. Now, how did this wonderful piece of legislation come about? That itself is a saga worth telling. It started in Rajasthan in the 1970s, I think. So at that time, the governments used to come out with programs to provide work to laborers when there was a drought, when there's a famine, or during the lean season. So the laborers, they were told to build roads, to erect small dams, other minor irrigation schemes, going for tree plantation, and then they were paid a certain minimum wage. So unfortunately, this whole scheme became corrupt to the extent that the laborers, they were not getting the wages they were entitled to get. On paper, it was shown that they're getting X amount of money, but in reality, they're getting X minus, and the balance was siphoned off. And very often, the laborers were non-existent. They were only on paper, bogus muster rolls, and the money was taken away. The money was taken away through that route as well. And a lot of the works which are shown to be done on paper were not being done. So this became a movement of the workers, of the laborers, and this was spearheaded by an organization known as the Mazdoor Kisan Shakti Sangathan, which was headed by one of my senior colleagues in the administrative service, Mr. Aruna Roy. So it was a very successful movement, and the government of Rajasthan was forced to come out with the Right to Information Act in 1997. And after that, a number of other states followed suit because this became a national movement. Goa also came out with the Right to Information Act. Maharashtra came out with the Right to Information Act. Tamil Nadu came out with the Right to Information Act. And finally, in 2005, we had a national Right to Information Act. I remember when I was serving the districts in various capacities, either as sub-divisional officer or as district collector or as chief executive officer of Zilla Parishad or divisional commissioner, one of my primary jobs was to provide work under the employment guarantee scheme. The Maharashtra government was one step ahead of other states in saying that the right to work is guaranteed. And anyone who demands work will automatically get work. But the same problems that the laborers in Rajasthan had, we also had. There was quite a lot of corruption going on, then a lot of laborers were only on paper, a lot of money was being siphoned off, etc. But before the Right to Information Act came out in 2005, the public did not have recourse to any of the documents of this employment guarantee scheme. And they could not ask and demand the muster rolls, they could not ask and demand the various payment vouchers. So now after 2005, I'm fairly sure that the corruption has come down substantially. So this is one great success story of the Right to Information, that it brings about greater transparency and it reduces corruption. The Right to Information Act, as Professor Gambre has already pointed out, it is also enshrined in our Constitution in Section 19(1)(a), which is the right to freedom of speech and expression. Because you cannot express and you cannot speak. At least you should not speak if you're not informed. Any form of expression or speech requires information. So if you do not have information, your fundamental right guaranteed by the Constitution does not exist. It exists only on paper. Similarly, the Supreme Court has held that the right to information is also essential for Article 21 of the Constitution, which is the right to liberty and life. This is probably a slightly broader definition of the right to liberty and life, but if you think about it, if you don't have information, life becomes impossible. And this is not just a human requirement. All species require information. Every animal, every bird, every reptile, it requires to know what is good to eat and what's not good to eat, where to get food, what is dangerous, where to take shelter. And this information which every species needs, it doesn't come instinctively. It is transmitted. This education is transmitted either through the parents or by observing others in the herd. So similarly, if you do not have information, then liberty and life becomes a non-starter. The Supreme Court in the case, a landmark judgment of RP Limited versus Indian Express newspapers, it held that the right to know or the right to be informed is a subset of Article 21. Without knowledge, life and liberty cannot be protected. Another landmark judgment of the Supreme Court was the state of UP versus Raj Narayan in 1975, where the court ruled that the rules of evidence that prevent disclosure of certain government documents in court proceedings may be overridden if the public interest in disclosure clearly outweighs the public interest served by keeping it a secret. If the public interest by disclosure of documents, government documents, if the public interest outweighs the public interest in keeping it a secret, then it should be disclosed. This is also a kind of central theme of the Right to Information Act. Because in the Right to Information Act, we come across situations where the information might be of a personal nature, it might be of a third-party information, but if the public interest outweighs the personal interest or the third-party interest, then that information has to come out in public. The preamble of the Right to Information Act is also worth quoting. Preambles, as you know, either the preamble to our constitution or the preamble to various acts, the preamble is the soul. It's the soul of the constitution or the soul of that particular act. So I'll just quote one paragraph from it. And whereas democracy requires an informed citizenry and transparency of information, which are vital to its functioning and also to contain corruption. They use the word to contain corruption. I would have preferred it if they used the word to eliminate corruption. But now I realize that that is probably being far too idealistic. So they said it is required to contain corruption and to hold governments and their instrumentalities accountable to the governed. This was a remarkable courage of the government at that time to come out with this act. So they are telling the public, hold us accountable, hold us to task, and take us to task if we make any mistakes. Now there's another concept which is interlinked with the right to information and interlinked with good governance, because everything should be seen holistically. And of course, the seminar is being organized by the Public Concern for Governance Trust. So good governance is something that they're very keenly interested in. Good governance is essential for democracy, because unless the people are governed well, then people get disillusioned with democracy. And this has happened in history throughout, like during the Nazi period. During the Nazi period, before the Nazi period, in 1933, in Germany was a democratic country under the Weimar Republic, but the Weimar Republic was weak and people got disillusioned with democracy and they turned towards dictatorship. So then if people are not governed well, if the country is not governed well, the people will get disillusioned, and then there will be some kind of dictatorship, either military dictatorship or a theocratic dictatorship or a absolute dictatorship, or maybe they might go back to monarchy. Like even after the French Revolution in 1789, when France became democratic, France went back to monarchy because people got disillusioned with the First Republic. At that time, it was the First Republic. So it is entirely appropriate that this seminar is organized by the Public Concern for Governance Trust, and Mr. Ribeiro here is one of the founding members of this trust. Now, what is good governance? There's no, I've tried to search for the definition of good governance, but then the long essays on it, but I could not really pin down to a few lines what exactly good governance should be. But I think the best way to define good governance is to go in for the utilitarian principle of John Stuart Mill and Jeremy Bentham, who are the two utilitarians. And they came out with the concept of the greatest good for the greatest number. Now, in any country, the resources are limited. A country is like a cake, and everybody wants a slice of cake. But then everybody can't get a slice of cake. So the person who makes decisions to ensure that the maximum number of people are benefited, rather than making decisions for a few, rather than giving that cake to a few people and depriving the majority, it's better to give that cake to the majority and deprive a few. So that utilitarian principle is at the root of good governance. There's the office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. So like I said, right to information is a human right. So the High Commissioner for Human Rights has also taken up the right to information issue. And he has said that good governance means transparency, accountability, efficiency, participation. These are essential attributes of good governance. And all of this requires information. So this concept of good governance, it is steered and promoted by the Right to Information Act. And this slim piece of legislation is one of the very few acts, I think it's the only act I can think of at the moment, where it actually empowers the situation. Because most of the legislation was basically there to suppress the citizens. But this actually directly empowers the situation, empowers the citizens. And it empowers in the sense that the people are free to question the government, to audit the government, to review, to assess and examine all the various acts of commission and omission, and to ensure that the governments operate according to the principles of public interest, good governance, and justice. This is the social contract. This is a social contract, or you can take it as Locke, Hobbes, and Rousseau. There's a contract between the people and the government. And then if the contract is broken, that is the end of democracy and end of fair play and justice. Transparency and efficiency, they are practically synonymous. Think about that as well. Transparency and efficiency. Because the more transparent you are, the greater will be the public accountability. And with public accountability, there will be pressure on the government, on the bureaucracy, on the individual officer to deliver, using his scarce resources to the best possible effect. So transparency is essential for good governance, and good governance is essential for democracy. Like I said, everything is intertwined. It is like one jigsaw puzzle, and all the puzzles fit into place, then we get a healthy democracy. Like I remember, we were talking about transparency and good governance. 3 years ago, when I was Chief Secretary of Maharashtra, at that time we had taken up a mission to improve our ranking in the World Bank Ease of Doing Business Index. The World Bank Ease of Doing Business Index. Every year, the World Bank comes out with a Ease of Doing Business Index where they rank 180 countries. And this is a very influential document. And on this ranking, investors decide whether to invest in a particular country or not. And we are hungry for foreign investment. So therefore, it was very important that we improve our ranking in this index. Now, our ranking was 150 out of 180 countries, which was very, very low. And the ranking for India was based only on 2 cities. The entire country's ranking was based just on certain parameters in Mumbai and Delhi. So it became incumbent on me, being the head of bureaucracy, to make sure that the ranking improves. So this meant that we had to be much more transparent, so, in a number of factors, like building permissions, electricity connections, land records, then various permits, licenses, permits and licenses to open shops and restaurants, and everything had to be fully transparent. So everything had to be put up onto the website. And then all processes had to be online. There should be no human to human contact, because that's the point where corruption starts. And so took it up as a drive, and then there was a resistance. Naturally, there'll be resistance, but you had to overcome all that resistance. And in the first year, we managed to improve our ranking from 150 to 100. So we jumped up 50 places. And the next year, we improved our ranking by another 35 places. Now the ranking was 65. I do not know what the latest ranking is. But now I can say for sure, I can't say for certain about Delhi, but at least for Mumbai, there's much more transparency, at least in these parameters of collection of taxes or licenses or permits, of building permissions, various tenders, various contracts, land records. It is all there on the website, and all processes, all applications have to be made online. There will, of course, be always room for improvement, and I'm sure that the government is conscious of that, and hopefully they're doing something about that. Recognizing the importance of transparency, the right to information also emphasizes that governments and the agencies, the various officers have to be proactive, and they should go in for suo moto disclosure of all the information that they possess on the website. So that is one of my main objectives, because if all the information is already there on the website, that will reduce my burden. Then people will not be coming to me on second appeal, and people will not be going to the public information officers because everything is already there on the website. And so that process is on, and it's a constant challenge, and it requires constant updation and constant persuasion, but that process is there. And we are trying to ensure that the government, an officer should not wait for somebody to ask for information. He should provide it without being asked. And the way to do that is put it up on the website. I would also, before I close, because of the question and answer session of this, I would like to make a request to the audience that they should make use of this Right to Information Act. Of late, what has been happening is that applications for information which are coming, they are not really in public interest. That is declined very badly, declined quite badly. Most of the applications which are coming for information are for the personal interest for various reasons. But genuine public interest applications have become very few. So I'd like to request the audience, I'm told there's an audience of 400, 500 out here, is that all of them should make use of this act and should strengthen the implementation of the act. And the way to do that is to file applications under the Right to Information Act. Some people get scared because they think that is a very cumbersome process, but this is a very citizens-friendly act, and it is a very, very simple process, and a lot of it is time-bound. So you just sort of fill up a one-page form asking for what information you want. It just costs 10 rupees, and that too is waived if, unfortunately, anyone is below the poverty line. And you can go to any office, and every office has a public information officer. You file the application, and now in the COVID time, applications are being received online, and then the public information officer has to give you the information within 30 days or reject it with reasons in 30 days. And if you reject it, then you can go to the first appellate authority, and then finally you can come to me. Now you'll find a lot of opportunities to ask for information. All of you are in Mumbai, you can ask for information regarding the state of the roads, how much money has been spent on the roads in your vicinity, the state of the pavements, or maybe the pavements have been taken over by hawkers, and you can ask for information about that, the hawkers policy, are the hawkers entitled to stay there? Or if you're interested in human rights, you can check up the condition in the prisons, you can ask for what are the facilities given to the prisoners, is it as per the jail manual? Or you can ask for what is the current situation of the under trials, and you can ask for anything, garbage collection, water connection. So you should make use of this act. And this act requires, like I said in the beginning, it requires support, it requires an informed citizenry. So I'll request everyone to file at least two right to information applications over the course of 1 year, or if you're more enthusiastic, certainly you can file more. We have activists who file 500 cases a month. So, because it's that simple, it's easy to file numerous cases, and information you're eventually bound to get. Because the exceptions for not providing you information are very, very few and very, very narrow. Only if it deals with national security or national sovereignty, or if it is in terms of a fiduciary relationship, like information between a doctor and a patient, or if it is has copyright implications. So only in very few cases is the information denied, which will probably be less than 1% of all the cases which come to us. So do make use of this act. And in case you have any doubts, in case you need any guidance, the act is very user friendly. So probably you won't require any guidance. But if you do require, there's always the members of the Good Governance Trust, people concerned for Good Governance Trust, they would be happy to help you. I've already discussed this with them. So thank you for listening to me. I will end here, and please ask whatever questions you need to ask.
Thank you very much, sir. If now we'll be moving on to the Q&A session. If anyone has questions for our speaker, please put it in the Zoom chat box. Okay, sir. So we have a question. Sir, it's could you provide the details of third-party information? So the question is that they want to know more about how third-party information works in RTI.
Third-party information is covered under Section 11 of the Right to Information Act. Suppose you want to know information regarding the property records of somebody else, or if you want to know the career details of somebody else, documents which belong to a third party. So then the public information officer will have to ask the third party whether that information should be provided or not. And then the third party has to give a reply within 5 days. So if he replies to give the information, then there's no problem. But if he replies not to give the information, then the public information officer then will have to decide whether, which I mentioned in my talk, whether the public interest in providing that information, it outweighs the private interest in keeping that information in private hands. If the public interest outweighs it, then that information has to be provided.
Thank you, sir. The next question is,
I'll just elaborate on this a little more. You see, what happens, I get a lot of appeals asking for information regarding various structures which they claim to be unauthorized. So then I have to ask for the various building permissions, I have to ask for various contract details, which technically is third party. But there the public interest is definitely more than keeping it a secret. So usually in 99% of the case, I overrule the objections of a third party. Okay, next.
Okay, sir. Thank you. The next question is, the RTI is seen as an essential tool for the common man with a simple procedure. How important of a role does the judiciary play in respect of that? Basically, the circle of the question is the RTI with respect to the judiciary.
The Right to Information Act, it has a section which debars the courts from, I'll just read out that section. It is section 23. It is the bar of jurisdiction of courts. No court shall entertain, they say no court. That means all courts. No court shall entertain any suit, application, or other proceeding in respect of any order made under this Act, and no such order shall be called in question otherwise than by way of an appeal under this Act. So appeals against an order of a PIO can only be done as per this Act. So the appeal against the Public Information Officer order can only be done by going to appeal of First Appellate Authority. And the Second Appellate Authority, which is the Information Commission, that is the final court of appeal. So courts cannot take up cases which asking for stays against decisions made by the commission. However, the courts have writ jurisdiction, and the courts use writ jurisdiction. And there are a number of cases like this where the writ jurisdictions have been used by the courts.
Thank you, sir. The next question is, so is the RTI is applicable for public authorities? Is it also applicable for private sector?
If it is a private sector, no, the Act is not applicable for that. However, there's certain amount of gray areas. One is that information relating to any private body which can be assessed by a public authority under any other law for the time being in force. So let us say that Income Tax Department can assess the income details of any person. So therefore, that should be covered under the Right to Information Act. But this also comes under Section 8 of the Act, which is basically personal information. Now, if the public interest outweighs the personal information, then the Commission can rule that the information should be provided. Then also various private institutions, if they have been substantially funded by the government, then they come under the provision of the Right to Information Act. Now, what do you mean by substantially funded? That the Act is not clear about, but I generally take it to be anything above 25% is substantially funded. So then, suppose a school is funded, private school is funded, or a hospital is funded, or a particular institution is receipt of government land. So they have been funded through land. So they come under the Right to Information Act. So therefore, the Right to Information Act has got a very wide ambit. So not only all government organizations, not only all semi-government organizations, but even private organizations from whom information can be taken by any other law, and private organizations which are substantially funded by the government. So the ambit is huge.
Thank you, sir. The next question is, why is there no set time period for answering by the authority after second appeal? In this regard, if you could shed light on why the 45 days of reply isn't enough for the second appellate authority to redress answer to the RTI appeal.
That is because it's a question of intake of cases. Now, the Act only mentions that there is a 30-day deadline for the Public Information Officer to either provide the information or to reject the information or reject the application. There is no deadline for the First Appellate Authority or the Second Appellate Authority. And the reason for that, at least for the second, generally the First Appellate Authority manages to clear its cases within a period of 2 or 3 months. But when it comes to the second appeal, For instance, I've got in my bench, there'll be about 3,500 cases pending. They have been pending for about a year and a half.
ये सर है ना मतलब पूरा गवर्नमेंट का फंक्शन बता रहे दे
You're on mute, sir.
Sir, you're on mute, sir.
Sorry, where did I come up to?
Sir, you were talking. So just now you got muted.
Okay.
When there was a disturbance.
So the way out of this, because we are wanting we are encouraging people to file more and more right to information applications. I just requested everyone to file right to information applications. So more and more people file right to information applications. The number of first appeals, number of second appeals will go up. So the only way out of this is that one is that I need more commissioners. Right now, I've got 7 commissioners. There's one chief information commissioner, which is me, and 7 commissioners. One commissioner for each revenue division in the state. I'm entitled to 10 commissioners. So I've asked for 3 more commissioners. And more crucially, the posts which have been lying vacant. Right now, the Pune commissioner's post has been lying vacant for almost 2 years. The Nagpur commissioner has been lying vacant for again almost 2 years. And then you have the Nasik commissioner lying vacant for a year and a half. So then automatically the backlog increases. So more commissioners. And the second way of removing the pendency, like I said, is that if every government office is more proactive in releasing information and putting up things on the website, then people will not feel the need to apply under the Right to Information Act.
Yes, sir. The next question is there any specific organization exempt from providing information under the Right to Information Act?
There are some organizations, those are there in the rules. So those are basically the obvious organizations. Like you'll have RAW will not be providing information, IB will not be providing information. So basically, basically institutions dealing with issues of sovereignty of the country, security of the country, they are exempt from providing information.
So the next question is, can we file an RTI on a draft or a bill before it becomes an act?
Once I didn't follow that question.
So the question is, can we file an RTI application on a draft or a bill before it becomes an act?
File an RTI application on a draft and a
Yeah.
bill.
Or a bill.
After the act came into force, then you can file an RTI application. Before the act, there could not have been an RTI application.
Okay, so the next question is, so what is the next procedure if the if the information is still not provided even after the information of the Information Commissioner in second appeal?
Technically, then nothing can be done. Like I said, there's no further appeal after the second appeal. There's no further appeal after the Information Commission has decided. But if it is if it can be taken up under writ jurisdiction, then you can go to the High Court or Supreme Court.
So is there any assistance available to the applicant for filing RTI applications?
Assistance, we have issued circulars that the public information officer should assist if it is asked for in filing RTI applications. So hopefully they're doing that. But the public information officers, you also have to understand that they are full-time employees and they're always busy people also. So then very possibly they won't have time to provide the assistance as required. But there are a number of RTI activists who do provide assistance, and then you have institutions, organizations like the People's Concern for Good Governance Trust. So they do provide assistance. But like I said, assistance is not really required. It is so clear, so straightforward that anybody, even a semi-literate person, can file an application. The Act is designed, I'll repeat, to be very, very user-friendly.
So we'll take one more question. The question is, will the RTI will be in conflict with the provisions of data privacy?
If it is in conflict with data privacy, then it will supersede whatever the laws of data privacy are, because that is what the section says, which I quoted earlier. That, like I said, this is a very powerful act. So section 22 is that the act shall have overriding effect over every. In fact, I'll read this out to you. The provisions of this act shall have effect, notwithstanding anything inconsistent therewith contained in the Official Secrets Act and any other law for the time being in force, or in any instrument having effect by virtue of any law other than this act. This is typical legalese, legal speak, but it basically means that it has overriding effect over every other law, every other act in this country.
Okay, thank you, sir. We have, since we have run out of time, we have run out of time now. So we'll be going on to the vote of thanks. I, Ayush Ramesh, would like to extend a vote of thanks to all of you. Firstly, I'd like to thank Malik sir for taking the time out to share his valuable insights with the audience and for encouraging the participants to make the use of this act. I'm sure each and every one of us understands the significance and how easy it is to use. I would also like to thank Ribeiro sir, Rekha ma'am, VP Raja sir, the principal of CWC College, Sachin Gambre sir, the faculty of CWC College for making this webinar possible and providing our participants with this opportunity to learn about such an important act and its significance. Lastly, I would like to thank all the participants here for attending this webinar. We hope you have a lot to take back from this webinar. Just a request at the end to all the participants, please do not exit the WhatsApp group. We'll be sending updates regarding the participation certificates on the group shortly. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you for organizing the seminar. And thank you to Mr. Ribeiro, Mr. Raja for taking time out for attending. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Ribeiro sir, bye sir. Raja sir, bye. Good night, you.
Thank you, Mr. Gambre.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Beautiful. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Sumit.
Thank you, sir. Thank
Nice
you.
hearing you.
Right, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Ribeiro. Thank you, Rekha.
Bye, sir. See you.
Thanks to Shreya, Ramesh, Renston, everybody.
All yes, thanks to all the youngsters.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, everyone. Okay, now we have reached the end of this. Thank you, everyone, for attending.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll be closing the live now. Thank you so much for attending.